A single tray of crystal glasses slipped from his hands, and the whole restaurant laughed. But one man didn't. Keanu Reeves stood up, walked toward the humiliated waiter, and said something that made the entire room go silent. What he did next would change that waiter's life and the meaning of respect forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The city outside glittered under a misty Manhattan night, but inside Maison Élysée, the air felt heavier than crystal. The chandeliers sparkled like trapped stars above white tablecloths that could blind the eye. Conversations hummed in polished tones, and the scent of truffle butter and aged wine clung to the air. It was a place built for the privileged, where a smile came with a bill, and the world outside didn't exist. Marcus Hall adjusted the cuff of his white shirt as he stepped out from the kitchen, balancing a tray of fine glasses with practiced grace. He was young, in his late 20s, with tired eyes that carried the weight of too many double shifts. The collar of his uniform felt tight against his neck, but he kept his back straight, his movements precise. Every tray mattered. Every glance could cost his job. At table 12 sat a group of wealthy men, investment bankers, by the sound of their loud, careless laughter. They'd been there for nearly an hour, their jokes growing more obnoxious as their drinks disappeared. Marcus approached, careful and calm, even as one of them, a slick-haired man with a gold watch the size of a coin purse, snickered at something whispered across the table. The pianist near the corner played a gentle tune that drowned beneath their laughter. Marcus placed the tray down, checking each glass one by one before filling them with chilled champagne. He'd done this thousands of times, but tonight, something felt different. The air was thick with mockery before the fall even happened. As Marcus turned with the empty tray, one of the men shifted his leg just enough to catch Marcus's foot. The move was subtle, almost casual, but it was deliberate. The tray tilted. Crystal clinked. Then came the sound every waiter dreaded: the crash. The glasses shattered into 100 glittering pieces across the marble floor. The music stopped. Conversations froze mid-sentence. For a moment, it was as if the entire restaurant inhaled and held its breath. The gold watch man leaned back in his chair, lips curling. "Guess someone's been drinking on the job," he said loudly enough for every table to hear. A burst of laughter erupted from his group. Marcus froze, staring at the broken glass as his face flushed with shame. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't." "Oh, of course not," another man interrupted, waving a hand in mock understanding. "Just a little clumsy, right? Happens to the best of you." The laughter grew crueler, cutting deeper than any insult could. Marcus crouched, gathering the shards with shaking hands, trying to blink back tears before they betrayed him. He wanted to disappear. At a quiet table near the back, a man in a simple black suit set down his fork. His name was Keanu Reeves. He had been dining alone, unnoticed, like a shadow. His eyes lifted from his plate and locked on Marcus. There was no anger there, only stillness. A quiet disappointment that carried more weight than outrage ever could. Keanu watched the scene unfold without saying a word. He saw everything: the deliberate trip, the laughter, the fear flickering behind Marcus's eyes. He had seen cruelty before, but something about this quiet humiliation cut deeper than most. The waiter's dignity was being stripped away piece by piece, not by violence, but by mockery disguised as humor. Marcus gathered the broken glass with bare hands, small cuts forming on his fingertips. He winced but said nothing. The manager rushed over, red-faced and panicked. "Marcus, what happened here?" she snapped, her tone sharp and accusatory. "You know how valuable these sets are." Before Marcus could respond, one of the men leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Don't be too hard on him," he said loudly. "He probably just lost his balance after his shift drink." The others roared with laughter again, slapping the table. Marcus's chest tightened. The heat of humiliation burned under his collar. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. Around the room, customers turned away, pretending not to see. It was easier that way to look down, to sip their wine, to ignore someone else's pain. Keanu's gaze swept the room, noticing how quickly comfort turned into cowardice. He could hear the faint trembling in Marcus's voice as he whispered, "I'm sorry, sir," again and again, as if the repetition could erase the cruelty of the moment. The manager sighed and motioned to a busboy. "Clean this up, Marcus. And next time, be more careful." Her tone was cold, indifferent, and the laughter from the table continued like a cruel soundtrack. Keanu took a slow sip of his coffee, his jaw tightening. Every word of mockery seemed to echo louder against the quiet piano that had resumed playing out of habit. He looked at Marcus, still on his knees, still gathering shards of broken glass. There was something sacred in the way Marcus tried to hold himself together, his pride, though bruised, still intact. One of the men leaned over and called out, "Hey, waiter, you missed a piece." He pointed to a tiny shard near his polished shoe, smirking like a child showing off a cruel trick. Marcus reached for it, his hand trembling, and the man deliberately nudged his foot forward, brushing against Marcus's fingers. Another burst of laughter. That was the moment Keanu's chair moved. Slowly, deliberately. The sound of it scraping against the marble floor sliced through the noise. Heads turned. The laughter stopped. Keanu stood, his expression unreadable. He wasn't a celebrity in that moment, just a man witnessing something wrong. His eyes locked on Marcus, who froze mid-motion, startled by the sudden shift in the room's energy. And then Keanu began to walk forward, each step echoing softly in the stunned silence, toward the table where arrogance had mistaken cruelty for power. Every step Keanu took felt deliberate, steady, measured. The rich men at the table straightened in their seats, unsure whether to smirk or stay quiet. There was something unsettling about the calm in his movement, as if every stride carried judgment heavier than words. He stopped beside Marcus, who was still crouched on the floor, clutching a handful of broken crystal. Keanu knelt down beside him without saying a thing. The room went utterly silent. Forks hovered in midair. Even the pianist froze mid-note. Marcus blinked, not believing what he was seeing. The man helping him pick up shards wasn't another waiter. It was Keanu Reeves, the same actor whose face was plastered on movie posters across the city, now kneeling on a marble floor to help him clean broken glass. Keanu gathered a few pieces carefully and placed them on the tray. He looked at Marcus with steady eyes and said softly, "Let's not let them take your dignity with the glass." Marcus swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "Sir, you don't have to," Keanu interrupted gently, shaking his head. "I know." His tone carried quiet authority, but it wasn't anger, it was compassion made visible. Then he stood and turned toward the table of men. His voice, calm but resonant, carried across the restaurant. "If dignity were measured by how we treat others," he said, "this man would be dining here and we'd be serving." No one spoke. The words hung in the air like thunder waiting to strike. Keanu reached for the tray, balanced it in his hands, and looked at Marcus. "Let me serve them for you," he said, "because he clearly has more dignity than us." Gasps rippled through the room. Phones came out, trembling slightly as customers realized what they were witnessing. The mockers sat speechless, their laughter long gone, replaced by shame that no apology could cover. Keanu didn't linger. He placed the tray upright, nodded respectfully to Marcus, and walked back to his seat. For a moment, all that could be heard was the faint hum of the city through the glass windows. Marcus stood frozen, unsure what to do. His heart pounded as a tear slipped down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away, not from weakness, but from gratitude. Around the room, people began to clap softly at first, then louder. But Keanu didn't react. He simply placed his payment on the table, adjusted his coat, and walked out the door, disappearing into the cool Manhattan night. And in that silence, every person in Maison Élysée knew something sacred had just happened. The sound of broken glass still hung in the air like a wound that refused to close. Marcus's hand shook as he crouched to gather the fragments, the chill of the marble floor seeping through his knees. The laughter from the table that caused the fall hadn't died completely. It lingered in smug whispers, in sideways glances, in the cruel smirk of men who believed wealth excused arrogance. The manager arrived, heels clicking sharply. She was flustered, but her frustration was pointed in the wrong direction. "Marcus, what did you do?" Her voice was clipped, more embarrassed than concerned. "Do you have any idea how expensive those glasses are?" Marcus swallowed hard. I tripped. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't replace Crystal," she muttered under her breath, kneeling just long enough to pick up one glass stem and hand it to him like evidence of his mistake. At the table, one of the men raised his glass mockingly. "Hey, don't be too hard on him," he said, smirking. "He just gave us a show." The other men chuckled, their laughter low but sharp enough to cut through Marcus's dignity. Customers nearby shifted uneasily. Some whispered, others looked away. In places like this, people preferred comfort over confrontation. The humiliation was uncomfortable, yes, but only for the man who had to endure it. Keanu watched from his seat, his hands resting on the table, eyes focused on Marcus's trembling shoulders. It wasn't the first time he had seen that posture, the quiet slump of a man swallowing pain just to keep his job. The way Marcus moved with silent obedience told a larger story. This wasn't new. It was just another day of surviving indignity. Keanu's gaze drifted toward the group of mockers. He studied their expensive watches, their careless movements, their laughter built on someone else's humiliation. He'd seen that type before, the kind that measured worth in dollars and saw decency as a weakness. The pianist tried to continue, fingers trembling slightly over the keys, but the music faltered. The atmosphere had changed. The luxury of the room now felt suffocating, the air thick with quiet shame. Marcus bent lower, his reflection distorted in the shards scattered on the floor. He whispered an apology again, more to himself than anyone else. His fingertips bled faintly from a sharp edge, a red drop blooming against the white cloth he used to clean. At the table, another man lifted his glass high, voice loud enough for all to hear. "To second chances," he toasted with a grin, "even for those who can't hold a tray." A few laughs followed, hesitant this time. Keanu exhaled slowly. His calmness wasn't indifference. It was the storm, just before motion. He set down his napkin, the faint rustle enough to make the manager glance his way. His eyes didn't flash with anger, but with resolve, an unspoken message forming in the quiet. Marcus's knees ached, but he stayed low, sweeping the last shards into the small dustpan. The manager kept muttering, her words laced with irritation rather than sympathy. "You have to be more careful, Marcus. This is the third time this month you've caused a scene." Her accusation cut deeper than the glass ever could. Marcus froze, glancing up in disbelief. "I didn't." But she was already walking away, fixing her hair, pretending composure as she passed other tables. The message was clear. The embarrassment of the restaurant mattered more than the humiliation of her staff. At the same table, the man who had tripped him leaned toward his companions. "You'd think he'd know how to walk by now," he whispered. "Must have skipped that lesson at waiter school." More chuckles. Marcus's ears burned. Keanu remained silent, still observing. His jaw tightened slightly, but his eyes stayed steady. He could feel the moral weight of the moment pressing against his chest. Each insult was another test of restraint, another reminder of how cruelty often wore a smile. A couple seated 2 tables away looked on. The woman, in her 40s, leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Someone should say something." Her husband sighed. "Not here. It'll just make it worse." That was how injustice often survived through polite silence. Marcus rose to his feet, holding the now empty tray like a shield. His knuckles were white. He forced a small nod toward the table of men. "Sorry for the trouble, gentlemen." His voice was soft, trembling. One of them raised an eyebrow, pretending to pity him. "You're forgiven," he said. "Accidents happen, especially when people aren't used to fine dining." A few quiet snickers followed. Keanu's fingers tapped against his table once, twice, as if timing the rhythm of his patience. He saw the manager glance toward the mockers with an appeasing smile, desperate to keep their money. The injustice of that tiny gesture, her loyalty to status over humanity, was enough to make him rise inside, though he stayed seated for now. Marcus turned toward the kitchen, eyes down. But as he passed Keanu's table, Keanu noticed the faint tremor in his hands, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back emotion. He saw something familiar in those trembling hands. A quiet strength, the endurance of a man who had to work twice as hard for half the respect. Keanu knew that kind of pain. The kind that didn't show in words, only in the silence you carried when the world refused to see you. The music had stopped again. Even the pianist seemed unwilling to break the tension. The air in Maison Élysée had shifted from luxury to discomfort. Every eye waited for what might happen next, but no one wanted to move first. Keanu finally drew in a slow breath, the kind that precedes something irreversible. His calm expression began to change. Keanu's hand moved slightly across the tablecloth, as if brushing away invisible dust. But it wasn't a casual gesture. It was a signal to himself that patience had run its course. His eyes met Marcus's for a brief second. The young waiter's shoulders were hunched, his pride barely holding on, his breathing uneven as he disappeared through the kitchen door. The men at the table went back to their drinks, laughing louder now, emboldened by the silence that followed. One of them clinked his glass against another's and said, "Guess even luxury can't buy good help these days." The words echoed, bouncing across the white walls, landing like small stones in every quiet corner. The other diners shifted in discomfort, pretending to look at their menus. The pianist took his hands off the keys altogether, unsure whether to keep playing or stop completely. The atmosphere, once dripping with elegance, now felt brittle and tense. Keanu's breathing steadied. He wasn't angry. Anger would have been too small for what he felt. It was something deeper. Disappointment. The same kind he'd felt as a young man watching people mock others just to feel taller themselves. He watched the doorway where Marcus had vanished. A minute passed. 2. Then Marcus re-emerged, holding a new tray, face composed but eyes dim. He moved carefully past the same table, determined not to give them another reason to laugh. The man with the gold watch leaned back in his chair again, smirking. He raised his glass one more time and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "To second chances." The others chuckled, clinking their glasses together. Champagne fizzed like laughter trapped in bubbles. Keanu set down his napkin, slowly, deliberately. The motion was so gentle that no one noticed at first. Then came the faint scrape of his chair legs against the floor. The sound sliced through the murmur like the first crack of thunder before a storm. Heads turned. The men at the table paused mid-laughter. The pianist froze. Keanu stood up, his tall frame calm but unyielding. His face held no smile, no frown, just quiet purpose. The entire restaurant seemed to sense something shifting, something that couldn't be undone once it began. His eyes met the mockers, and then drifted back to Marcus, who stood frozen with the tray, unsure what to do. The laughter that had filled Maison Élysée only moments ago faded into uneasy silence. Even the light from the chandeliers seemed colder. Keanu took a breath and stepped forward. The moment of quiet before intervention had arrived. Keanu's footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor as he began to move. The world inside Maison Élysée seemed to hold its breath. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered above plates, and the quiet tension in the room thickened like fog. Every eye turned toward him, unsure of what they were witnessing. Marcus stood by the table, frozen. The tray in his hands trembled slightly. He couldn't understand why Keanu Reeves was walking toward him. For a split second, he thought maybe he had done something wrong, again. The fear of losing his job rose in his throat, but the look on Keanu's face silenced that thought. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, an unspoken recognition. Keanu reached Marcus and stopped beside him. He looked down at the scattered fragments of crystal still glinting under the chandelier's light. Without hesitation, he bent his knees and lowered himself to the floor. The sound of fabric brushing against marble filled the silence. Gasps rippled through the room. Marcus's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Sir, please don't." Keanu didn't answer. He reached for a shard of glass, careful, methodical. His movements were slow, deliberate, respectful. He placed each piece onto the tray Marcus still clutched, as though restoring something sacred. The men at the table watched in stunned disbelief. The one with the gold watch smirked nervously, trying to recover the tone of control. "Mr. Reeves, you don't have to do that," he said, chuckling awkwardly. "The help can handle it." Keanu didn't look up. His hands moved steadily, his focus absolute. "No," he said softly. "The help has already done enough tonight." A sharp pause followed. "The kind that burns the air around it." The pianist's fingers hovered above the keys, waiting for a signal that never came. The entire restaurant was caught in a strange stillness, the kind that happens when someone does something no one expects. Marcus knelt beside Keanu now, unsure what else to do. His heart pounded in his chest. He had never been treated as an equal in this place, much less by someone like him. Their hands brushed once, as they both reached for the same piece of glass, and Marcus pulled back instinctively. Keanu glanced at him and said quietly, "It's all right." For the first time that evening, Marcus looked up, fully meeting eyes that saw him not as a servant, but as a man. Around them, luxury itself seemed to lose meaning. The chandeliers, the silk tablecloths, the designer suits, all faded into the background. The only thing that mattered was the image of one man kneeling beside another, restoring what arrogance had broken. Keanu stood up slowly, lifting the tray from Marcus's hands and setting it gently on the table beside them. His expression was calm, but his presence filled the entire room. Every movement he made was quiet, deliberate, and unshakably sure. The silence had grown heavy, so heavy that even the sound of someone breathing too loudly might have broken it. Marcus remained on his knees, still processing what was happening. His instincts told him to apologize again, to shrink into the background, but something about Keanu's stillness made him stop. It was as if this man standing above him was giving him permission to exist fully in a place that had long treated him as invisible. Keanu turned to the table of men who had mocked Marcus. Their faces were tight, with forced smiles, their laughter long gone. The gold watch man cleared his throat and tried to sound casual. "Mr. Reeves, we were just joking around. No harm meant." Keanu's eyes stayed on him for a long moment before he spoke. His voice was low, steady, and unmistakably firm. "If dignity were measured by how we treat others," he said, "this man would be dining here and we'd be serving." The words landed like a gavel striking wood. Not loud, but final. The restaurant went completely still. The pianist's hand, frozen above the keys, slowly lowered. No one dared to move. Marcus felt the air change around him. The shame that had wrapped him like a chain began to loosen. Keanu continued, his gaze unwavering. "We all like to think we're decent people," he said softly, "until kindness costs us comfort." No one responded. The men at the table looked down, their earlier arrogance crumbling under the quiet truth in his words. Keanu then turned to Marcus. He reached for the tray again, setting it upright, balancing it easily with one hand. "Let me serve you," he said simply, his tone neither grand nor theatrical. "Because he clearly has more dignity than us." Gasps filled the air. A few customers instinctively raised their phones, unable to stop themselves from recording what they knew was history in motion. The gold watch man blinked rapidly, his voice faltering. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "It was just a joke." Keanu looked at him once more, his tone soft but cutting. "Cruelty is never a joke. It's just cowardice, dressed in laughter." For the first time that evening, the room felt honest. Every mask of politeness had fallen. The hierarchy of money, power, and pride had been stripped away. All that remained was truth, plain and human. Marcus's eyes glistened. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't need to say anything at all. Keanu stood there for a moment longer, letting silence finish what his words had already started. The men who had mocked Marcus couldn't meet his eyes. Their laughter had evaporated, replaced by an uneasiness that no amount of wealth could disguise. Around them, the diners sat motionless, afraid to even breathe too loudly. Marcus tried to speak, his voice faint. "Mr. Reeves, please, you don't have to do this." Keanu turned toward him and said quietly, "Maybe I do." His tone wasn't dramatic. It was steady, humble, almost gentle. Sometimes silence tells the wrong story. He placed the tray carefully back into Marcus's hands. The young waiter looked down at it, then back up, unsure whether to cry or thank him. His throat tightened with emotion, and for the first time that evening, he stood a little taller. Keanu looked again at the group of men. "It takes nothing to mock someone," he said, his voice calm. "But it takes everything to carry yourself with grace when the world tries to humiliate you. That's real strength." No one dared respond. Even the manager, standing near the bar, lowered her head. Phones were already raised discreetly across the room. A few people whispered in disbelief. The moment had become larger than the walls around them, something too powerful to be contained by chandeliers and marble floors. Keanu didn't stay to soak in the attention. He turned toward Marcus one last time, nodded respectfully, and placed a folded bill beneath a saucer on his table. Then he picked up his coat, draped it over his arm, and walked toward the exit. Each step he took felt like a quiet declaration. No shouting, no anger, no grand gesture, just calm integrity walking through a sea of shame. As he reached the door, someone began clapping. One pair of hands, then another. Within seconds, the sound spread until the entire restaurant was applauding not for the celebrity, but for what he had done. Marcus stood motionless, still holding the tray. The applause washed over him, echoing in his chest like a heartbeat. For the first time in years, he didn't feel small. He didn't feel invisible. Keanu didn't turn around. He stepped out into the cool Manhattan night, disappearing into the soft city glow. Inside, the piano player finally placed his hands back on the keys and began to play again. The melody was slow, reflective, almost mournful. And as Marcus stood there, still trembling, one thought repeated in his mind. Someone had finally seen him. For several long seconds after Keanu left, no one moved. The heavy restaurant doors closed softly behind him, and the faint echo lingered like the memory of a sermon. The air inside Maison Élysée was thick, almost suffocating. The gold watchman stared down at his reflection in his untouched glass of champagne. His earlier grin was gone. Even his friends avoided his eyes, their once boisterous table now a picture of quiet shame. Marcus stood motionless in the center of the room, tray in hand, his pulse racing. The lights glimmered across the shards of crystal still scattered near his feet. He wanted to clean them up, but his body wouldn't move. It was as if the silence itself held him still. Then, from a nearby table, a woman's voice spoke softly, "You're all right now." Those 3 words were enough. Marcus bent down again, not out of humiliation this time, but out of duty. He began stacking the remaining fragments onto the tray, his movements steady. The tears that had been threatening finally broke free, tracing lines down his cheeks, catching the light as they fell. He didn't wipe them away. The manager approached, her heels hesitant, her usual confidence gone. "Marcus," she said quietly, her voice tight, "you should take a moment in the back." But when she saw the other customers staring, she changed her tone. "And please, thank Mr. Reeves if he returns. We'll make a statement about this tomorrow." Marcus looked up, confusion flickering across his face. "A statement?" She nodded, flustered. "Yes, well, you know how things look. The cameras, the phones. We have to protect the restaurant's image." The irony stung. She was still thinking about image when dignity had just been restored before her eyes. Marcus didn't answer. He simply placed the last piece of glass on the tray and turned toward the kitchen. At the same table, one of the younger businessmen finally muttered, "He really made us look bad." The gold watch man scoffed, trying to recover his pride. He overreacted. It was just a joke. People are too sensitive these days. But his words sounded hollow. No one at the table agreed. They avoided looking at him, each man trapped in his own quiet guilt. As Marcus passed their table, one of them whispered, "Hey, Sorry, man. Marcus nodded faintly, but didn't stop. He pushed through the kitchen door, the sudden heat of the stoves hitting him like a wave. The noise of clattering dishes and shouted orders filled his ears, grounding him back in reality. He leaned against the counter, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. One of his co-workers, a dishwasher named Andre, looked up from the sink. Bro, what was that out there? Was that really him? Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah, it was him. Andre grinned in disbelief. Man, you just had Keanu Reeves stand up for you. That's wild. Marcus managed a small, disbelieving smile. Yeah, he whispered. It was. Marcus stayed in the kitchen longer than usual, trying to slow his heartbeat. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming softly. His hands still trembled. The echo of Keanu's words playing over and over in his head. Every sound from the dining room felt distant, as if he were underwater. Andre leaned against the counter beside him, shaking his head. Man, that was crazy. You good? Marcus nodded, though his voice was low. I think so. It's just, nobody's ever done something like that for me. Andre chuckled softly. Yeah, well, that wasn't just anybody. You had John Wick out there picking up glass for you. Despite the tension, Marcus laughed quietly, a sound mixed with disbelief. He didn't do it for show. I could see it in his face. He meant every word. From the corner of the kitchen, another waiter poked his head through the swinging doors. Yo, Marcus. People are talking about it out there. They're all recording and posting already. It's everywhere. Marcus frowned. Posting? Yeah, man. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, everyone saw it. You're trending right now. Marcus blinked, stunned. What? The waiter nodded eagerly. Someone caught the whole thing. The line, he said, if dignity were measured by how we treat others, that's all over the captions. Marcus didn't know what to say. He had never been part of anything viral in his life. For years, he'd been invisible, just another server in a city full of noise. Now, his humiliation and redemption were being replayed on millions of screens. He leaned against the counter again, pressing his palms into the cool steel. I don't even know if I want that kind of attention, he murmured. It's strange. People only care now because someone famous saw it. Andre shrugged. Maybe, but sometimes that's what it takes for the world to notice. In the dining room, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The manager moved between tables, trying to salvage what was left of the restaurant's reputation. The once proud gold watch man signed his check quickly and left without a word. His friends followed silently, their arrogance crumbling into awkward retreat. As they walked past the bar, one of them muttered, Man, this is going to haunt us online. He just shook his head and said quietly, Maybe it should. Marcus finally returned to the dining room, carrying himself differently this time. The pain was still there, but something had changed. A weight had lifted, replaced by something fragile, yet powerful dignity. He didn't know it yet, but by the time the night ended, that quiet act of courage would ignite a conversation far beyond those glittering walls. By midnight, the story had already crossed oceans. Clips from Maison Elysée filled timelines everywhere, thousands of posts. Under the same headline, Keanu Reeves defends black waiter from racist taunts. The 30-second video spread faster than anyone expected. Every platform was flooded with comments praising Keanu's calm defiance and the quiet strength of the man he defended. At home in his small Bronx apartment, Marcus sat on the edge of his couch, staring at his phone. The video was there too, glowing on his screen. He watched it once, then again, barely recognizing himself in the frame. There he was, trembling, embarrassed. Yet beside him, Keanu, steady as stone, lifting him without words. The comment section moved too fast to read. Some wrote, "This is how you use fame with grace." Others said, "That waiter's dignity outshone everyone in that room." Marcus's name trended overnight, though few people knew his story yet. He set the phone down, rubbing his face with his hands. The night replayed in flashes the crash of glass, the laughter, and then that still moment when silence turned into respect. His daughter Alyssa was asleep in the next room, her small drawings taped to the fridge. He looked at one where she had scribbled a heart and written "Daddy" in uneven letters. He smiled faintly. Maybe someday, when she was old enough, she'd see this and know her father stood tall even when the world tried to make him small. Across the city, news anchors discussed it with the same awe the diners had felt. Words like grace, humility, and humanity were used again and again. In a world addicted to outrage, this moment of quiet dignity felt like a revelation. Back at Maison Élysée, the staff whispered about the incident long after closing. The manager sat in her office, replaying the video with a pit in her stomach. She had seen her own face in the background, stern, dismissive, cold. Now the whole world had too. She pressed her palms together, whispering, "What have I done?" By dawn, the video had surpassed 10 million views. Talk shows requested interviews. News outlets reached out to Keanu's team, but he declined every offer. His only statement was a short note posted on his website. Kindness shouldn't need witnesses. Those 5 words went viral again, quoted beneath every repost of the video. And somewhere between the noise, Marcus felt something shift deep within him. For the first time in years, he believed the world had seen what dignity looked like. Not fame, not wealth, just simple decency. Morning sunlight crept through the thin curtains of a small Bronx apartment, landing on a chipped kitchen table cluttered with bills, a half-empty coffee cup, and a little pink lunchbox. Marcus sat slouched in his chair, phone in hand, scrolling through the same viral clip that had been replayed on every screen in America overnight. There he was on the video, his face pale with shock, his hands trembling beside broken glass, and beside him, Keanu Reeves kneeling with quiet defiance. The clip froze for a moment as he stared at it. The subtitle beneath reading, "Dignity deserves no spotlight," but it found one. Marcus rubbed his eyes and set the phone down. He didn't know how to feel. The world now saw him as a symbol of strength, but he still felt like the same tired waiter who could barely pay rent. In the small bedroom across the hall, his 9-year-old daughter, Alyssa, stirred beneath a blanket printed with cartoon stars. She sat up and called, "Daddy?" Marcus straightened, forcing a smile as he walked in. "Hey, baby, you're up early." She yawned, blinking sleep from her eyes. "Everyone at school was talking about you. They said you were on TV. Is it true?" Marcus hesitated. "Yeah, I guess it is." She grinned. "Did you really meet Keanu Reeves?" He nodded. "I did." Her smile widened. "He's the guy who rides motorcycles, right?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Yeah, but last night, he did something even braver than that." Alyssa tilted her head, curious. What did he do? Marcus looked away for a moment, then back at her. He reminded people that kindness still matters. After he dropped her off at school, Marcus walked to the subway with his hood pulled low, hoping no one would recognize him. But when he reached the restaurant later that morning, whispers followed him through the hallway. Some of his coworkers smiled and patted his shoulder. "Man, you handled that like a champ," one said. Another added, "You and Keanu can't believe I'm saying that y'all made history last night." But not everyone was kind. A server named Lenny muttered, "Great. Now we're all gonna get cameras shoved in our faces because of him." Marcus kept walking. He didn't have the energy to argue. He clocked in and tied his apron, the same way he always did. But it didn't feel the same. His coworkers' stares weren't just glances anymore, they were opinions. Some saw him as an inspiration. Others saw him as trouble. He exhaled quietly, stepping back into the dining room that still smelled faintly of spilled champagne. The same tables, the same lights, but everything had changed. As the day went on, Marcus noticed the subtle differences in how people treated him. The morning crew offered him small smiles, the kind that said, "We saw what happened." Even the head chef, a usually gruff man who barely looked up from his pans, gave Marcus a nod of quiet respect. But not everyone shared that warmth. The assistant manager, who'd always looked down on him, now avoided eye contact. Lenny, the bitter server who'd made the snide remark earlier, kept shaking his head. "You think this attention's gonna last?" he muttered as they prepped for lunch service. "Internet forgets in a week." "Then what?" Marcus didn't answer. He wasn't chasing attention. He'd never wanted to be seen this way. He just wanted a steady paycheck and enough time to be home before Alyssa fell asleep. When the first customers came in, one of them, a woman in her 60s, stopped Marcus as he refilled her water. "You're the waiter from the video, aren't you?" He froze for a second. "Yes, ma'am. That was me." She smiled kindly. "I just want to say, you held yourself with grace. My husband was a server for 30 years. He would have been proud." Marcus smiled, genuinely touched. "Thank you, ma'am." But later that afternoon, a different kind of attention came. A young, influencer-type woman recorded him on her phone, narrating loudly, "Look, it's the guy Keanu Reeves helped last night. Say something for the camera." Marcus managed a polite smile but said softly, "Please, ma'am, I'm just working." Her smile faltered. "Oh, okay, sorry." When she left, Marcus leaned against the counter, trying to steady himself. He wasn't angry, just tired. Fame, even accidental fame, felt heavier than he imagined. That night, after closing, Marcus sat alone at a corner table. The restaurant lights were dimmed, and the staff had gone home. He took a deep breath, letting the silence wrap around him. His thoughts drifted back to years before, to when he still believed the world might give him a fair shot. He had always wanted to cook, not serve. As a teenager, he'd watched his grandmother, Miss Thelma Hall, make Sunday dinners for the whole block. Her cornbread recipe could make grown men cry. She used to tell him, "Baby, food ain't just food. It's love with a flavor." Marcus had dreamed of becoming a chef like her, but after culinary school interviews turned cold once they saw his skin color and address, his path closed fast. He took the first job that would hire him washing dishes, then serving, then whatever came next. The years blurred into double shifts, unpaid overtime, and a quiet resolve to make sure Alyssa never felt the same rejection he had. He whispered into the empty room, "I just want her to have more than I did." And for the first time, he wondered if this strange moment, this viral fame he never asked for, might somehow open a door he thought was locked forever. The next few days blurred into interviews, messages, and unexpected phone calls. Reporters left notes under his apartment door. News outlets called the restaurant. A few coworkers started treating him like a local celebrity, asking for quotes or tagging him in photos, while others rolled their eyes behind his back. Marcus tried to stay grounded. Every morning, he still woke up at 6, made Alyssa breakfast, and packed her lunch. Life had to stay normal, but the weight of sudden attention made him uneasy. He'd spent years trying to be invisible. Now the whole world seemed to know his name. That Saturday, after dropping Alyssa at her friend's birthday party, he walked to Street, Mary's Park, where he often went to think. The fall air was crisp. Children played on the swings while their parents chatted near the benches. He sat quietly, watching the leaves fall. He thought about his late mother, the woman who'd taught him about pride, faith, and hard work. She used to tell him, "Son, when the world won't see your worth, don't stop showing it. Sooner or later, somebody will notice." Maybe that's what Keanu had done noticed. Not the mistake, not the broken glass, but the man behind it. Marcus looked down at his hands, the same ones that had held trays, scrubbed dishes, and built a life from nothing. They were rough, lined, but honest. He wondered what Alyssa would think when she grew up and learned how that one night changed everything. When he returned home, he found a letter in his mailbox. It wasn't from a journalist or a company, it was from a culinary foundation in Harlem. The letter said they'd seen the viral story and wanted to offer him a scholarship to complete a chef certification course, fully funded. Marcus read it 3 times, certain he was misunderstanding. His eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. For years, he had believed that dream was gone. But somehow, through an act of decency he hadn't even asked for, the door had opened again. He set the letter down on the table and exhaled, his voice shaking. "Thank you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to Keanu, his mother, or something greater. Still, a quiet worry lingered. Fame could be a double-edged sword. For every kind word online, there were comments calling the story exaggerated or staged. He didn't want to be anyone's headline. He just wanted to earn respect honestly, quietly, through his work. Marcus looked toward Alyssa's room and smiled. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let this moment define him. He'd let it remind him who he always was. The city outside Keanu's apartment glowed in streaks of orange and blue, headlights flashing through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. His home was quiet, modest, nothing like the lavish penthouses his peers favored. A single bookshelf lined the wall beside an old, upright piano, its wood faded but loved. He sat on the couch, barefoot, a cup of black tea cooling beside him. The television hummed faintly, showing the same viral clip for what felt like the 100th time. Reporters' voices overlapped, each calling his action extraordinary, heroic, or the moment that broke the internet. Keanu muted the sound and leaned back, his face half lit by the flicker of the screen. He watched himself kneeling beside Marcus, helping gather the glass. The freeze frames, the slow-motion edits, the dramatic music added by strangers, it all felt wrong. That wasn't what had happened. There had been no performance, no plan, just instinct, just decency. He sighed softly and whispered, "It wasn't heroism." The city noise outside faded beneath the weight of his thoughts. In his mind, he replayed not the video, but Marcus's face, the shock, the quiet restraint, the tremor in his hands. That was the moment that haunted him, the way dignity could survive humiliation. He turned off the TV and reached for his worn leather notebook resting on the table. "Kindness," he wrote, "is only radical in a cruel world." He paused, pen hovering. Those words felt heavy, not poetic, just true. He underlined them once, then sat back and stared at the page. Keanu had seen cruelty before, but this moment had affected him differently. It wasn't about the laughter or the mockery. It was about the silence of the room, the way everyone had chosen comfort over conscience. That silence was what he couldn't forget. He remembered his mother teaching him as a child to treat everyone the same, whether they swept floors or ran studios. Maybe that's why the scene had hit him so deeply. Somewhere along the way, the world had started celebrating power more than kindness, and that didn't sit right with him. He picked up his tea and took a slow sip. The bitterness grounded him. He wasn't proud of what he did. He was disturbed that such a simple act had shocked so many. He looked toward the window, the reflection of the city lights flickering across the glass. "We've forgotten how to be human," he murmured. Maybe he reminded us. He didn't know Marcus personally, but he felt he owed him something. Not a favor, not money, but gratitude. Gratitude for standing tall in a moment that revealed how small others had become. Keanu closed his journal and set the pen aside, his eyes drifting toward the window. The rain had picked up, streaking silver lines down the glass. He watched the city move below him, umbrellas opening, taxis splashing through puddles, faces hurrying past one another without ever looking up. It reminded him how disconnected people had become, how easy it was to look away when someone else was hurting. He thought back to the restaurant, the sharp laughter, the smirks, the way the pianist had stopped mid-note. That moment of silence still lived inside him. Not the applause that followed, not the headlines, but that silence, the uncomfortable stillness right before he stood. He could still feel it. He picked up his phone and scrolled through the flood of messages from his publicist, his agent, and friends from Hollywood. Everyone wanted him to give a statement or appear on a talk show. "You should. Ride this wave," one text read. "Use it for your foundation." People loved this story. He locked the screen without replying. There was nothing to ride. This wasn't a wave. It was a mirror, and too many people were afraid to look into it. Keanu stood, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. He walked to the piano and touched the keys lightly. The sound was soft, uneven. He hadn't played in months. But tonight, He pressed a few notes together until they formed something quiet, reflective. Music always helped him think. As the melody grew, his mind returned to Marcus the way he had bowed his head, not in weakness, but in control. It was a strange kind of strength, the kind that didn't need to shout. He paused, hands hovering over the keys. He remembered an old interview from years ago when a journalist asked what success meant to him. He had answered without thinking, peace of mind. Now, that answer felt incomplete. Maybe success wasn't about peace at all. Maybe it was about purpose, the small, invisible choices that built a world worth living in. He turned off the lamp beside the piano and sat back down on the couch. The city lights painted his face in gold and shadow. He thought about how fame had made people see him as untouchable, larger than life. But that night had reminded him he was still human, still part of the same fragile story as everyone else. He took out his phone again, but this time, instead of checking messages, he opened his notes app. He typed slowly, "Find Marcus Hall." It wasn't a command, it was a promise. He didn't want cameras, or press, or headlines. He just wanted to shake the man's hand, to tell him that his quiet grace had restored something the world desperately needed to remember. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds as Keanu sat at the small table by his kitchen window, a notebook open beside his coffee. The headlines hadn't slowed overnight. His phone vibrated constantly with updates, hashtags, and news alerts. Everyone wanted his words, his perspective, his approval, but he didn't owe the world another statement. What mattered to him was the man whose story had started it all. He opened his laptop and began searching, quietly typing Marcus Hall waiter, Maison Élysée, Bronx. Dozens of articles appeared, each recycling the same photo of him kneeling beside Marcus. Some exaggerated the story, some distorted it. But Keanu looked past the noise until he found one local piece. Single father at the center of viral moment speaks. The article was short, written by a community journalist. It mentioned Marcus's daughter, his long hours, and his quiet wish to one day become a chef. Keanu read it twice. There was no bitterness in Marcus's words, only gratitude. The line that stayed with him most was, "He didn't rescue me. He reminded everyone that I mattered." Keanu leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly. That was it. The truth, distilled into one simple sentence. He closed his laptop and looked out the window at the street below. Delivery trucks rumbled by. A cyclist passed. A dog barked from somewhere unseen. Life went on. And that was exactly why he wanted to find Marcus, not as a public gesture, but as something private, meaningful, human. He thought about how rare it was to meet someone who carried quiet strength in a world obsessed with noise. Marcus hadn't fought back, hadn't yelled, hadn't demanded attention. He had simply endured with grace. That kind of composure came from something deeper than pride. It came from knowing your worth even when no one else did. Keanu opened his journal again and added one more line beneath last night's entry. Dignity doesn't shout, it stands. He read it once, then closed the notebook, slipping it into his bag. He didn't know what he would say when he met Marcus. Maybe he didn't need to say much at all. Sometimes gratitude was best expressed in presence, not words. As he left his apartment, pulling on his worn leather jacket, the air outside felt cool and steady. The noise of the city surrounded him, yet his heart was calm. He wasn't going to seek attention. He was going to seek connection, to thank the man who reminded him that kindness, in its simplest form, could still stop the world. 3 days after the story had begun to quiet down online, Marcus arrived at work expecting another long shift. He tied his apron in the locker room, half listening to the chatter of coworkers talking about tips, customers, and weekend plans. The buzz about the viral video had finally started to fade, and part of him was relieved. Fame had never fit him. Well, it felt like wearing someone else's coat. He checked the schedule posted on the corkboard. His name was there in neat handwriting, along with a note underneath. "See the manager before your shift." Marcus frowned. Usually, those notes meant trouble, some small mistake, a policy reminder, or worse. He took a breath and walked toward the office at the back of the restaurant. When he pushed the door open, the manager, Miss Hartley, stood behind her desk, fidgeting with her pen. She looked nervous in a way Marcus had never seen. "Marcus," she said, "there's someone here to see you." Before he could ask who, a familiar voice spoke from the corner. "Hey, Marcus." He turned and froze. Keanu Reeves stood by the window, hands tucked loosely in his coat pockets, the same calm expression he'd worn that night. He looked as natural in that room as if he belonged there. Marcus blinked twice, trying to speak, but his voice caught. "Mr. Reeves, you're here?" Keanu smiled, walking forward to shake his hand. "I told myself I'd find you. Didn't think it would take this long." For a moment, the room was quiet, except for the sound of the city traffic outside. Miss Hartley stepped aside, gesturing toward 2 chairs. "You can use the staff lounge if you'd like. Take all the time you need." Marcus followed Keanu down the short hallway, his heart pounding in disbelief. Every few steps, he glanced sideways, as if to make sure this wasn't some dream. The hum of the refrigerators and the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen felt strangely distant. When they reached the lounge, Keanu motioned for Marcus to sit. The actor took the chair opposite him, setting a folded notebook on the table. "I wanted to thank you," Keanu began, "for how you handled that night. You stayed calm when you had every right to walk away." Marcus shook his head, his voice still uncertain. "I didn't do anything special. You're the one who—" Keanu interrupted softly. "No, you did. You showed dignity when it was hardest to." Marcus looked down, swallowing hard. "I was just trying to keep my job." Keanu leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and that's exactly what made it powerful. Marcus sat still, his hands clasped together on the table. He could feel the roughness of his palms, the years of long hours and labor that had shaped them. "I still can't believe you came here," he said quietly. "You didn't have to." Keanu smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But sometimes we meet people who remind us of the kind of world we're supposed to build. You did that for me." Marcus shook his head, humbled. "All I did was drop a tray." Keanu's eyes softened. "No, you carried yourself with respect when people tried to take it from you. That's harder than it looks." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "When I saw what they did to you," he said, "it reminded me of something my mother used to tell me. Never let the world convince you that kindness makes you weak. That's what I saw in you that night. Strength that doesn't need to shout." Marcus looked up, his throat tightening. "You know, I wasn't always this calm. I used to get angry a lot. I learned to hide it because anger never paid the bills. But that night, I felt smaller than I've felt in years." Keanu nodded. "You didn't look small to me. You looked like someone holding the line." Marcus blinked, the words catching him off guard. He took a slow breath, then said, "I've worked here for almost 8 years. People don't usually look at us as people. We're just uniforms to them. But my daughter, she's 9. She saw the video. She told me she was proud of me, and that's the first time she's ever said that." Keanu's eyes warmed. "Your daughter, what's her name?" "Alyssa," Marcus said, smiling for the first time. "She's the reason I keep going. Her mom passed when she was little, so it's just us. I work nights and weekends to make sure she's got what she needs." Keanu nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "That's what hit me the hardest when I read about you," he said. "All the headlines focused on the moment, but they missed the story. You're not just a man who was humiliated. You're a father who kept his dignity so his daughter could hold her head high too." Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "That means a lot coming from you, really." Keanu smiled again, quietly. "You don't owe me thanks, Marcus. If anything, I came to thank you." Marcus frowned slightly. "Thank me? For what?" Keanu leaned forward, his tone gentle. "For reminding me that goodness doesn't come from the spotlight. It comes from how we treat each other when nobody's watching." Marcus sat in silence for a while, unsure how to respond. His throat felt tight, his palms damp. Every word Keanu said seemed to cut through the noise that had surrounded his life since that night. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "You've already done more for me than anyone ever has." Keanu shook his head gently. I didn't do anything special, Marcus. You did. You showed the world that grace can stand where pride usually falls. He paused, his tone softening even more. You reminded me that sometimes we forget how much quiet strength lives in ordinary people. Marcus looked down, the emotion swelling behind his calm expression. All my life I've been told to stay in my place, he said. To smile, to take what comes, and to be grateful just to have a job. That night, I thought it was just another moment I'd have to swallow. But then, you stood up. Keanu smiled faintly. You made it easy to. The words hung in the air, simple but powerful. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He placed it on the table, sliding it toward Marcus. I heard about your daughter, Alyssa, he said. You mentioned her in that article. I don't want to intrude, but I wanted to help her dream a little easier. Marcus's eyes widened. Mr. Reeves, I call me Keanu, he interrupted kindly. And don't worry, it's not charity. Think of it as an investment in her future. Marcus hesitated before opening the envelope. Inside was a scholarship application and a personal note written in Keanu's steady handwriting. For Alyssa Hall, may the world she grows up in be kinder than the one her father had to endure. Marcus's voice broke. I don't know how to thank you. Keanu leaned forward, his tone quiet and sincere. You already did. You showed the world what respect looks like when it's tested. You showed my generation, and hers, that humility still has power. Marcus nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. Keanu stood and extended his hand again. Marcus rose to meet it, gripping it firmly. The handshake lingered steady, human, and filled with understanding. Let's make sure your daughter grows up in a world that treats her father with respect, Keanu said softly. Marcus swallowed hard, managing a small, grateful smile. That's all I've ever wanted. Keanu smiled back, his eyes reflecting quiet pride. Then we're already halfway there. As he left the lounge, the moment felt sacred. Two men from different worlds connected by one simple truth. Dignity never needs permission to exist. The story of Marcus and Keanu had already captured hearts. But within a week, it became something larger. Something that no one could have predicted. Every major talk show across America was running the footage, breaking down each second like it was a scene from a film. Morning hosts called it the most moving act of quiet courage in modern celebrity culture. Late-night comedians, for once, skipped the jokes. They just replayed the clip in silence, letting it speak for itself. Across radio shows and podcasts, the discussion deepened. Commentators spoke about race, dignity, and the invisible hierarchy that separated the served from the served upon. A professor from Howard University said, "This wasn't about celebrity heroism. It was about seeing a black man regain his humanity in a space designed to strip it away." Marcus, who tried to stay away from the media storm, couldn't escape it. His phone buzzed with endless notifications. He saw strangers sharing their own stories, delivery drivers, janitors, fast food workers, and housekeepers, each posting under a new hashtag that had exploded overnight. Numbers serve with respect. A delivery driver from Detroit wrote, "I've been called names, ignored, and humiliated, but watching Marcus stand tall while someone famous stood beside him, it gave me hope." A hotel maid in New Orleans posted, "We don't want pity. We just want to be seen." The video montage that soon followed took the internet by storm. It wasn't slick or heavily produced, just a string of real people telling their truths. A janitor in Chicago, a grocery clerk in Atlanta, a waitress in Seattle who said she cried watching the moment Keanu picked up the glass. The message was simple but powerful. Dignity belongs to everyone. Talk shows began inviting Marcus to appear, but he declined most of them. He didn't want to become a spectacle. He wanted the message, not his name, to last. Meanwhile, Keanu's team was bombarded with requests for interviews and brand campaigns. Corporations wanted him to represent kindness, to monetize a moment that had never been about profit. He turned every offer down. When one major news network invited him to speak, his representative replied simply, "He'll release a statement when he's ready." 2 days later, he did. Keanu sat in his apartment, facing his laptop camera, No makeup, no script. The background was plain, a window, a coffee mug, and soft daylight. He uploaded the 60-second clip to his verified account with no caption, no music, no fancy edits. He looked directly into the lens and said, "We don't need more outrage. We need more respect." He paused, letting the words breathe before continuing. Anger fades. Respect builds. The way we treat the people who serve us says more about us than our titles ever will. He ended the video there. No hashtags, no follow-up, just truth. The video spread faster than anyone expected. Within 24 hours, Keanu's 60-second message had reached every corner of the internet. News outlets called it the calmest call for change ever spoken. On social media, people quoted his words under photos of restaurant staff, janitors, bus drivers, and delivery workers. The phrase, "We don't need more outrage, we need more respect," became the heart of a movement. On morning radio shows, callers shared stories of quiet decency. A retired nurse in Ohio said she watched the clip 10 times before work, crying each time. A young man from Texas said he had once mocked a fast food worker, but went back the next day to apologize. The story had done something that outrage alone never could. It softened people. The national conversation shifted. Instead of shouting across divides, people began listening. Schools used the video in classrooms to talk about empathy and classism. Churches played it during sermons about humility. Even corporate executives began holding workshops about dignity in the workplace. The ripple spread so far that late-night hosts closed their shows not with jokes, but with reflections. Marcus, meanwhile, watched it all unfold from his small apartment in disbelief. He saw people wearing shirts with the words "Respect Builds" printed across them, and the local newspaper ran a front-page story titled, "The Waiter Who Changed the Conversation." He still refused interviews, but he couldn't stop reading the comments from ordinary people, mothers, fathers, teenagers, who thanked him for reminding them that compassion still existed. One night, while scrolling through a forum thread, Marcus found a video compilation made by a teacher in Milwaukee. It showed clips of students in her class standing in front of the camera, saying what respect meant to them. One boy said, "Respect means not laughing when someone falls." A girl added softly, "It means helping them stand back up." Marcus smiled through tears as the final frame appeared a still image of Keanu helping him gather the glass, overlaid with the words, "Humanity isn't dead. It's just waiting to be noticed." Keanu, on the other hand, stayed silent after posting the video. He turned down all interviews, refusing to let his message become another headline. But silence didn't stop the momentum. His short clip passed 100 million views in 4 days. World leaders, athletes, and artists shared it, each adding their own stories of everyday kindness. A magazine wrote, "In a culture addicted to noise, Keanu Reeves reminded us that decency doesn't need to shout." And yet, the actor himself stayed grounded. When his assistant showed him the trending hashtag number "Respect Builds," he only smiled faintly and said, "As long as people mean it." By the end of the week, major media outlets began focusing less on the viral fame and more on the deeper issue behind it. The people society overlooked every day. Panel discussions turned to race, class, and the quiet discrimination that often went unseen. A historian on one program said, "What makes this moment special isn't the celebrity. It's the reminder that every era needs someone to show us that kindness isn't weakness, it's civilization." In a world where anger usually burned fast and faded quicker, this moment endured. It wasn't a scream. It was a whisper that refused to die. And through it all, both Marcus and Keanu carried on with their lives quietly, not chasing headlines, only living proof that respect, once shown, can echo far beyond a single night. By the following week, the calm that had once defined Maison Élysée was gone. The same doors that had welcomed New York's elite now faced a storm. Reporters crowded the entrance every morning, microphones and cameras flashing as they shouted questions about the viral incident. What had once been a symbol of class now stood as a monument to humiliation and denial. The restaurant's owner, Charles Beaumont, watched from his office upstairs. His empire had been built on exclusivity and image. But in the age of social media, image could crumble in a day. His phone buzzed nonstop with calls from investors, public relations firms, and even his lawyer. "Charles, we need to respond," his head of PR said through the phone. "There's a petition circulating online. Nearly 200,000 signatures demanding a public apology and a change in management." Charles pinched the bridge of his nose. "An apology won't undo the damage," he muttered. "No," the publicist replied, "but silence will make it worse." Downstairs, Marcus continued to work his shifts quietly, despite the chaos surrounding him. Protesters occasionally appeared outside with signs that read, "Dignity isn't a luxury," and "Respect the workers." Some customers came only to meet him, shaking his hand as if he were a celebrity. Others took photos, whispering behind menus. The atmosphere was tense. What had once been laughter-filled dining rooms now carried the weight of guilt. The staff moved more cautiously, their interactions softer, more measured. Even the pianist played slower songs, as if to match the somber tone of the place. Behind the scenes, things grew worse. Miss Hartley, the manager who had scolded Marcus that night, was called into the office for an emergency meeting. When she emerged an hour later, her eyes were red. She was suspended indefinitely. The announcement spread quickly among the staff, leaving mixed emotions in its wake. Some felt justice had been served. Others pitied her, though few could forget how she'd looked the other way. A day later, Charles held a private meeting with his senior team. "This cannot continue," he said. "We're losing reservations by the hour. Celebrities are canceling their events. We need to take control of the narrative." One executive cleared his throat. "We could offer Marcus a settlement," he suggested. "A confidentiality agreement, a payout, and maybe a promotion on paper. That might calm the press." Charles nodded slowly. "Good. Make it happen quietly." Marcus was called into the office that afternoon. The HR representative smiled politely but avoided his eyes. "Mr. Hall," she said, "we understand this has been difficult for you. The company would like to offer a settlement to help you move forward." Marcus frowned. "A settlement?" "Yes," she continued smoothly. "A financial package and a non-disclosure agreement. It would allow you to take time off, focus on your family, and put this behind you." He stared at her for a long moment. "You want me to stay silent?" She hesitated. "We'd prefer the term, move on." Marcus took a deep breath, realizing that for all the attention, some things hadn't changed at all. Marcus sat in the office, the contract resting on the desk between him and the HR representative. The offer looked official, numbers typed neatly across crisp white paper, but something about it felt hollow. The air in the room was heavy, filled with the faint smell of espresso and tension. He ran a finger along the edge of the document. "So, this is what my dignity's worth to you?" The woman across from him shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Hall, please understand, this isn't about value. It's about closure. The company wants what's best for everyone involved." Marcus looked up slowly. "Closure doesn't come from money. It comes from doing what's right." She hesitated, lowering her eyes. "I understand, but these kinds of situations, they get complicated." Marcus leaned back in his chair. His voice stayed calm, but his words carried weight. "It only gets complicated when people avoid responsibility. I'm not here to get rich. I just wanted an apology and a fair chance to lead." The HR representative blinked, unsure what to say. "I'm not signing that," Marcus said finally, pushing the papers back toward her. "You can keep your settlement." Her professionalism cracked for a moment. "Mr. Hall, please think carefully. Turning this down could make things difficult for you." He stood, his tone still steady. "Ma'am, things have been difficult for me my whole life, but at least now, people are watching." As Marcus walked out, a few employees paused to watch. Some smiled faintly, nodding in quiet admiration. Others whispered nervously, fearing for his job. But Marcus felt lighter. For the first time, he wasn't reacting to what life threw at him. He was choosing his own answer. Later that evening, Keanu called him. He had heard through quiet channels what the restaurant had tried to do. His voice over the phone was calm but firm. "You did the right thing, Marcus." Marcus exhaled. "I just didn't want to feel bought," Keanu replied. "That's how change starts. You didn't let them bury the truth." "I don't know what happens next," Marcus admitted. "They could fire me." Keanu paused. "Then we'll be ready. I've already connected you with a labor rights attorney. She's one of the best in the city. And don't worry, I'll cover her fees. You just tell your story, honestly." Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. "You don't have to do all that." "I know," Keanu said softly. "But dignity deserves allies." The next morning, the story broke again. This time, from inside sources. Headlines read, "Waiter offered hush money after viral incident refuses to stay silent." Public outrage reignited. Petitions multiplied. The restaurant's phone lines crashed from the volume of angry calls. Under pressure, Charles Beaumont called an emergency press conference, standing before flashing cameras. His voice trembled slightly as he read from a prepared statement. Maison Élysée deeply regrets the events that occurred and the way they were handled. We have failed to uphold the values of respect and equality. Behind him, the restaurant logo glimmered like a hollow crown. And though Marcus never sought revenge, justice had finally started to arrive, not through fury, but through grace. A month passed before the tension around Maison Élysée began to cool, though the public hadn't forgotten. The restaurant's name had been dragged through every headline in the country, and its once glittering reputation now carried a shadow. The owner, Charles Beaumont, had tried to salvage his business through apologies and promises, but nothing seemed to restore what was lost. That was when he made an unexpected decision to hold a closed meeting with his entire staff, a few select members of the media, and, at Keanu's request, no cameras. It was late afternoon when Marcus arrived. He wore a clean white shirt, the same color as his uniform, but without the apron that had come to define him. His daughter Alyssa walked beside him, dressed in a soft yellow dress that swayed as she moved. She clutched his hand tightly, her eyes wide with wonder at the large chandeliers and velvet curtains. Rows of chairs had been set up in the dining area, where guests usually enjoyed fine wine and laughter. Today, the tables were pushed aside to make room for something humbler truth. The staff filled the seats first, whispering among themselves. A few nodded at Marcus, others smiled quietly. For once, there were no sides, only curiosity and respect. Charles stood near the podium at the front, dressed in a dark gray suit that looked a little too formal for the gray moment. Beside him sat the head of HR, a few legal advisors, and Miss Hartley, the former manager, who had recently been reinstated after publicly admitting her failure to defend Marcus. She looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When Keanu entered, the air shifted. He wasn't dressed like a movie star, just jeans, a blazer, and that calm presence that carried more power than any spotlight. He didn't walk to the front or stand apart. Instead, he quietly took a seat in the second row, blending into the audience. Only a few people even noticed at first. Charles adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat. His voice was steady, but there was a visible tremor in his hands. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "This has been a difficult time for all of us. But more than that, it's been a time to learn." He paused, glancing at Marcus, before continuing. "When that incident happened, I saw it as a public relations nightmare. What I failed to see was the human cost, the pain it caused one of my own employees, and what it revealed about how we treat the people who serve us." The room was silent. Every word carried the weight of sincerity. Charles took a deep breath. "Marcus Hall," he said, looking directly at him. "You deserved better. You deserved respect, protection, and trust. And for not giving you those things, I apologize from my heart." The room stayed still, the sound of his voice echoing softly against the high ceiling. Marcus looked up, meeting his gaze. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet grace. Marcus stood slowly, his hand still holding Alyssa's for courage. He wasn't used to standing in front of a room like this, but something in him felt different now, steady, sure, unafraid. "Thank you, Mr. Beaumont," he said, his voice calm but strong. "I appreciate your words. I never wanted this to be a war. I just wanted to come to work, do my job, and be treated like I matter. That's all any of us want." The owner nodded, visibly moved. "You're right," he said softly. "And that's why I asked everyone here today to make sure this place never forgets again." He turned toward the audience, scanning the faces of his staff. "We've built our name on fine dining and service. But service means nothing without respect. From this day forward, Maison Élysée will become more than a restaurant. It will be a place that honors the people who make it possible." A quiet ripple of applause followed. The staff looked at one another, some teary-eyed, some stunned that such words were being spoken aloud. Then Charles looked back at Marcus. "And to make sure we live up to that promise, I'd like to make an announcement." He glanced briefly toward Keanu before continuing. "Starting today, Marcus Hall will become our new floor manager. He'll lead staff training on respect, empathy, and inclusion. No one understands dignity better than he does." A gasp moved through the room, followed by a wave of applause. Alyssa clapped the loudest, her small hands echoing like fireworks in the quiet restaurant. Marcus blinked, speechless. For a moment, he couldn't even stand. Charles smiled gently. "You earned this, Marcus. You didn't fight for revenge. You stood for what's right. That's the kind of leadership this place needs." Marcus took a slow breath, emotion thick in his throat. "Thank you," he managed to say. "I never thought something like this could happen. I just wanted to do my work and go home to my daughter. But maybe now, maybe she'll grow up knowing that her father's work means something." Alyssa tugged on his arm and whispered, "It always did, Daddy." Laughter spread through the room, soft and warm. In the second row, Keanu watched quietly, his hands folded. He caught Marcus's eye for a moment, then gave a small nod, the kind that spoke volumes without a word. Marcus nodded back, holding his daughter close. Charles stepped forward again, his tone hopeful. "Let this day mark a new beginning not just for this restaurant, but for every place that thinks status gives permission to disrespect. It doesn't. We're all human. We're all equal here." Applause rose again, stronger this time, filling the room like a wave. The chandeliers shimmered as if reflecting the emotion that words couldn't capture. Keanu stood as the meeting ended, quietly slipping out before cameras could find him. He didn't want credit. He just wanted to leave the room, knowing that justice had taken its place at the table, and this time, it wasn't reserved for the rich. That evening, Marcus walked up the narrow stairwell to his apartment, the faint smell of paint and cooking rice lingering in the air. He carried a small box in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. It had been a long day, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel tired. He felt full. Inside the box was a tiny chocolate cake with white frosting and a single candle. It wasn't much, but it meant something. When he pushed open the door, Alyssa was already at the table, drawing with her crayons. She looked up, her eyes lighting instantly. "Daddy, you're home early." Marcus smiled. "Yeah, I wanted to surprise you." Her gaze drifted to the box in his hand. "Is that cake?" He laughed softly. "It sure is." She jumped up from her chair, clapping her hands. "What are we celebrating?" Marcus placed the box on the table and sat down beside her. "Something special. Something we both earned." He opened the box carefully, revealing the small cake. On top, written in shaky icing, were the words, "New Beginnings." Alyssa gasped. "Daddy, did you get a new job?" Marcus nodded. "Sort of. They made me a manager today." Her mouth fell open. "You mean like the boss?" He chuckled. "Not the big boss, but I get to help teach people how to treat others better. Maybe make the restaurant a place where everyone feels respected." Alyssa threw her arms around his neck. "Daddy, that's amazing." He hugged her tightly, his eyes closing for a moment. "Yeah, it is." They set the cake on the table and dimmed the light. Marcus lit the small candle, watching the flame dance gently between them. "Make a wish, sweetheart," he said, Alyssa closed her eyes and whispered something he couldn't hear. Then she looked up, smiling. "Your turn, Daddy." He hesitated, thinking about all the years of struggle, the humiliation, the quiet prayers whispered into sleepless nights. Then he smiled and said, "I don't think I need to wish for anything. I already got more than I ever dreamed of." They blew out the candle together, and for a moment, the tiny apartment felt like the warmest place in the world. After dinner, Marcus washed the dishes while Alyssa sat at the table, working on another drawing. When she finished, she brought it over to him. It showed two stick figures holding hands beside a big window. One was him, wearing a smile. The other was a man with long hair and a black coat. Above them, she'd written in bright purple crayon, "Thank you, Mr. Keanu." Marcus's throat tightened as he stared at the drawing. "She's got your heart, sweetheart," he said quietly. "All kindness." Alyssa grinned. "I just wanted him to know he helped us." Marcus nodded slowly. "He'll know." Later that night, after Alyssa went to bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table under the soft glow of the overhead light. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. On the table lay the drawing Alyssa had made of him and Keanu, and next to it, a blank thank you card he'd bought from a corner store on his way home. The front was simple white with a gold border, and inside, he started to write slowly, carefully, choosing each word. "Dear Keanu," he began, "I don't know how to put gratitude into words. What you did for me wasn't just an act of kindness, it was a reminder that dignity still matters. You didn't just defend me that night, you restored my hope. You gave my daughter someone to believe in, and you reminded me to believe in myself again. Thank you for seeing me." He paused, reading it twice before signing both their names. Marcus and Alyssa Hall. He smiled faintly, sealed the envelope, and set it beside her drawing. He'd mail it tomorrow. Before turning in, Marcus walked into Alyssa's room. She was fast asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit, the faintest smile on her lips. He stood there for a moment, thinking of all the nights he'd come home, exhausted, promising her that someday things would be better. Tonight, for the first time, he felt that promise beginning to come true. Miles away, Keanu sat by his apartment window, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. The rain had returned, tapping softly against the glass. On the table beside him sat an opened envelope, the same card Marcus had written earlier that week. Now, in his hands, he read the words again, his expression unreadable, but deeply moved. He turned the card over, noticing that Alyssa had added a small heart drawn in purple crayon on the back. Under it, in her uneven handwriting, she'd written, "Thank you for helping my daddy." Keanu's lips curved into a gentle smile. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. The world often expected grand gestures from him, roles, speeches, appearances. But this small card meant more than any award ever could. He whispered softly to himself, "Hope. That's what this was always about." The city outside seemed quieter than usual. Somewhere, a siren wailed faintly in the distance, then faded. Keanu placed the card carefully inside his journal, next to the page where he'd written the line weeks earlier. "Kindness is only radical in a cruel world." He added one more sentence beneath it. "Sometimes, hope is just one good man refusing to look away." He closed the book and rested his hands on it for a moment, feeling a stillness settle over him. In another part of the city, Marcus stirred awake briefly and looked toward the small window above his bed. The moonlight cut a thin silver line across the room. He thought of Keanu, of that moment in the restaurant, and of how a single act had rewritten both of their lives. He smiled, whispering into the quiet, "Thank you." It wasn't just gratitude for what had happened. It was for the reminder that the world still had good in it. And as the night deepened over New York, two men, one famous, one ordinary, slept peacefully under the same sky, bound not by fame or fortune, but by a shared belief that kindness, no matter how small, could still change the world. Within days, Keanu's quiet act of humility had spiraled into a storm he never wanted. His phone buzzed with endless messages, producers, journalists, podcast hosts, all begging for a comment or exclusive interview. Some wanted to frame him as a moral hero. Others wanted a viral headline about Hollywood's last gentleman. But he read each request with the same weary expression and quietly declined them all. One morning, his assistant arrived with a stack of printed interview offers from networks across the world. "You could turn this into something huge," she said gently. "A press tour, maybe a foundation launch. People are hungry for stories like this." Keanu shook his head. "That's exactly why I shouldn't. The story isn't about me." "But you're the face of it," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "No, the face of it is the man who showed grace when the world laughed at him." Later that afternoon, he released a short written statement through his publicist. It was only 3 sentences long, but they carried the power of everything he believed in. "The man who showed grace under pressure deserves the attention, not me. The spotlight belongs to those who keep their dignity when it's hardest to hold on to." Marcus Hall reminded us all of what real class looks like. The statement spread instantly. News anchors read it on live television. Social media platforms turned it into a graphic quote shared millions of times. And for the first time, Marcus's name appeared without Keanu's beside it. Marcus, meanwhile, was learning what it meant to live in the eye of a cultural storm. Every time he opened his phone, there were messages from strangers, waiters in Europe, factory workers in South Africa, single parents in small towns across America, all thanking him for his strength and composure. He didn't feel like a hero. He still rode the subway to work, still packed Alyssa's lunch every morning, still made grocery lists on scrap paper. But he began to notice something shifting inside him. People started to listen when he spoke. Customers treated staff differently. And slowly, an idea began to grow in his mind. One afternoon, while walking Alyssa home from school, he passed a group of teenagers sitting on the curb outside a cafe. They were laughing about a customer who had yelled at a barista earlier. One of them said, "Man, I'd have lost it." Another added, "Not me. I'd have quit right there." Marcus stopped, turned to them, and said, "You know what the hardest thing in the world is? Keeping your calm when you know you're right. That's where strength lives." The teens looked at him curiously, not recognizing who he was. He smiled, nodded, and walked on. But the moment stayed with him. That night he told Alyssa, "Maybe I should start talking to more people about what happened, and about what we can learn from it." Alyssa looked up from her homework and said, "You already know what to say, Daddy. You just have to say it loud enough." He laughed quietly. "You might be right, sweetheart." The next week, he accepted an invitation from a local community college to speak to their hospitality students. It was a small event. No reporters, no sponsors, just 50 young people trying to make a living. Marcus wore a plain shirt and stood before them, holding nothing but a folded piece of paper in his hands. He didn't need to read from it. Marcus looked out at the students, their faces curious and tired in equal measure. Many of them worked night shifts, juggling school and jobs just like he once had. He smiled gently before speaking. "You know," he began, "people keep asking me how I stayed calm that night. Truth is, I didn't think. I just refused to let someone else decide who I was." A hush fell over the room. He continued, his voice steady but soft. "The world will try to tell you your worth is tied to your title, your clothes, or your paycheck. But real class, real worth, is how we treat people who can't give us anything in return." The students leaned in, hanging on every word. "I spent years thinking dignity was something people gave you," he said. "But I learned it's something you never let them take. Even when you're tired, even when it feels unfair, even when no one's watching you hold on to it. That's how you win." When he finished, the room was silent. Then, one by one, students began to applaud. Some stood, some wiped their eyes. A few walked up afterward just to shake his hand and say thank you. That night, a student posted a short clip from the talk on social media. It showed Marcus standing at the front of the classroom, saying, "Respect isn't earned by money, it's earned by how we make others feel." Within 24 hours, the clip had over 2 million views. Requests began pouring in. Schools, restaurants, labor unions, even corporate offices wanted him to come speak about dignity in the workplace. He didn't have a publicist or a manager. He didn't even have a speech written. But he kept showing up wherever he was invited. Community centers, schools, coffee shops, speaking to anyone who would listen. Soon, a movement started to take shape around his message. People began sharing stories of kindness at work under a new tag, Number Real Class. Baristas wrote about customers who thanked them by name. Truck drivers shared videos of colleagues helping strangers on the road. Small moments of respect multiplied by millions. Marcus often smiled when he saw the stories online, but he didn't crave the attention. He still came home to the same apartment. Still tucked Alyssa into bed each night. Still reminded her to say please and thank you. The difference now was the sense of purpose. He felt, for the first time, that his struggles had meant something. Meanwhile, Keanu watched it all quietly from afar. News networks praised Marcus as the man who turned humiliation into hope. He received invitations to appear alongside Keanu on national television, but Keanu declined again and again, letting Marcus carry the story forward. He told a friend over coffee, "He doesn't need me anymore. He's doing what I hoped for," reminding people that kindness doesn't belong to celebrities. It belongs to everyone. And so, as the world found inspiration in Marcus's words, both men, one famous, one ordinary, continued their quiet work, not chasing cameras, not chasing praise, just proving, day by day, that respect can still ripple farther than fame. 3 months later, the world still hadn't forgotten the night Keanu Reeves stood up for a waiter in a Manhattan restaurant. The story had become a modern parable, shared in classrooms, workplaces, and dinner tables around the world. Even as the news cycle moved on, the lesson stayed quiet, powerful, and enduring. Marcus had continued giving talks, not as a celebrity, but as a working man with something real to say. His schedule filled with community centers, union meetings, and youth workshops. He spoke with the same humility he'd always lived with, ending every session with the same line: "Real class isn't how we look, it's how we make others feel." One crisp morning, Marcus received a call from a national talk show producer. The host wanted to feature him on their program alongside Keanu Reeves. Marcus hesitated. He had promised himself he would never use Keanu's name for attention. But the producer explained, "It's not about fame. It's about the world seeing what respect looks like when it comes full circle." After a long pause, Marcus agreed. On the day of the interview, the studio lobby buzzed with quiet anticipation. Staff moved quickly, adjusting lights, fixing microphones, and whispering last-minute instructions. Outside, cameras from every major network waited to capture a glimpse of the two men whose story had inspired millions. Backstage, Marcus sat in the green room, nervously adjusting his tie. He wasn't used to makeup artists or stage lighting. He thought of Alyssa, who had begged him to let her skip school to come, and smiled at the memory of her proudly saying, "You and Mr. Keanu are heroes now." A knock on the door broke his thoughts. The producer peeked in. "They're ready for you, Marcus." He stood, exhaling slowly, and followed the staff through the corridor. As he reached the stage entrance, he saw Keanu waiting there, dressed simply in a dark blazer and black boots. He turned with a calm smile. "Hey, Marcus," Keanu said warmly. "Hey," Marcus replied, shaking his hand. "Didn't think we'd ever do this." "Neither did I," Keanu said. "But I'm glad we are." The stage manager motioned for them to enter. The bright lights hit them as they stepped onto the set. The studio audience erupted in applause, cheering loudly as the host greeted them both. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "today we have two men whose act of compassion changed the world's conversation about dignity and respect. Please welcome Keanu Reeves and Marcus Hall." They took their seats side by side, the host beaming at them. "Marcus, Keanu, thank you both for being here. Millions have seen that video and the movement that followed. How does it feel to know that one small act has inspired so much change? Marcus smiled shyly. Honestly, it's still strange. I didn't do anything special. I just tried to stay calm. He's the one who stood up. Keanu turned to him, shaking his head lightly. No, Marcus, you stood long before I did. I just followed your lead. The audience clapped, a few people standing in admiration. The host leaned in, smiling, and, Mr. Reeves, she said. Everyone remembers that moment when you said, "Let me serve you." It's been quoted around the world. What made you do it? Keanu took a deep breath, his voice calm but firm. Because silence helps bullies, he said. Respect stops them. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound filling the studio with warmth. The applause carried for nearly a full minute before fading into a soft hush. Keanu's words seemed to hang in the air, simple, unpolished, but heavy with truth. The host smiled, visibly moved. That's a powerful statement, she said quietly. And you're right, the world's loud with outrage, but it's rare to see someone use calm as strength. Keanu nodded slightly. Outrage burns out. Respect builds. Marcus turned toward him, his eyes glistening. I've been thinking about that ever since that night, he said. I used to think strength meant fighting back, but that night taught me that holding your dignity no matter what is the hardest fight of all. The audience grew silent again, every face focused. A young woman in the front row clasped her hands over her mouth, visibly emotional. The host leaned forward. Marcus, you've spoken at schools, community events, and even corporations now. What message do you want people to take from all this? Marcus smiled softly, choosing his words carefully. That we don't need to be famous to make a difference. We just have to show kindness where it's missing. When someone humiliates you, you can choose to walk away. But when someone stands beside you, that's what changes everything. Keanu glanced at him with quiet pride, his eyes reflecting genuine admiration. The host nodded thoughtfully. It's rare to see two people from such different worlds come together and create something that feels human again. Marcus chuckled lightly. We're not so different, he said. We both just want people to be treated right. Laughter and applause followed, but beneath it was a feeling deeper than entertainment. It was unity. Then, as the applause faded once more, Keanu reached over and placed his hand gently on Marcus's. The gesture was simple, unplanned, but it froze the room in stillness. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the moment, the quiet handshake of two men bound by empathy, not fame. Keanu said softly, "You reminded me that goodness doesn't need permission, it just needs courage." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "And you reminded me that the world's still watching. We just have to give it something worth watching." The audience rose to their feet, clapping through tears, some holding their hands over their hearts. Even the host stood, unable to contain her emotion. That clip of the handshake spread across every screen before the show even ended. News outlets called it the moment that healed the noise. Commentators replayed Keanu's line, "Silence helps bullies, respect stops them," over montages of kindness caught on camera from around the world. By nightfall, the video had been viewed tens of millions of times. But for Keanu and Marcus, it wasn't about the numbers, it was about the meaning. When the studio lights dimmed and the audience dispersed, the two men walked quietly to the exit. Keanu turned to Marcus with a small smile. "The world doesn't change overnight," he said. Marcus nodded. "No, but it can start with one night." And as they stepped out into the cool morning light, it felt like the world, for once, was listening. The weeks following the reunion interview brought a new kind of energy across the country. For once, social media wasn't driven by outrage. It was driven by empathy. The handshake between Keanu and Marcus had become a symbol of what people were hungry for: decency, respect, and genuine humanity. The ripple that began with a single act in a Manhattan restaurant was now reaching neighborhoods, schools, and workplaces far beyond New York. Across the nation, restaurant owners began rethinking how they trained their staff. In Chicago, a family-owned diner launched an initiative called Serve with Dignity, a simple promise that every worker, dishwasher, busboy, or manager would be treated with the same respect as the guests they served. Within weeks, more restaurants followed suit. A fast casual chain in California implemented Respect First sessions for all new hires. In Atlanta, a small cafe added a framed quote above their counter. "Grace under pressure is the highest form of strength." The movement was organic, unplanned, and unstoppable. Food industry associations began sharing free materials inspired by Marcus's speeches, and a few nonprofits reached out to him directly, asking if he would consider leading workshops for hospitality workers nationwide. He agreed without hesitation. Marcus didn't see himself as a leader, but as he stood in front of groups of servers, cooks, and cleaners from all walks of life, he realized he had become something larger than a voice. He had become an example. In city after city, he spoke about dignity, humility, and the quiet power of self-worth. He didn't preach, he told stories. He talked about that night when he was humiliated, and how it could have ended differently if no one had stood up. "The world doesn't change because we're angry," he told one audience in Houston. "It changes because someone decides to stay kind when cruelty feels easier." His workshops grew in attendance. Workers brought their families, restaurant owners brought their teams, and journalists quietly filled the back rows, listening as this soft-spoken man transformed pain into purpose. Each event ended the same way, with a standing ovation and a reminder from Marcus. Respect starts with us. What he didn't know was that the growing movement had a silent partner. Behind the scenes, Keanu was helping fund the Serve with Dignity programs anonymously. He had been sending quiet donations through his charitable foundation, ensuring that community centers, training spaces, and travel costs were covered. He wanted no attention for it. When asked privately by a journalist if he was involved, he replied simply, "I'm just glad people are listening to the right voice." But word has a way of finding light. During a workshop in Denver, one of the coordinators pulled Marcus aside. "Hey," she said, smiling, "did you know your program's being supported by a donor named KR Enterprises?" Marcus frowned. "KR?" She nodded. "Whoever he is, he's been covering everything from flights to venue rentals. I think you might know him." Marcus smiled quietly, shaking his head. Of course he did. That night, back at his hotel, Marcus sat at the small desk by the window, looking out over the city lights. He picked up his phone and typed a message he'd been meaning to send for weeks. "Keanu," it read, "I just found out what you've been doing. You didn't have to, but thank you. Again." He hesitated, then added one last line. "You said respect builds. Looks like it's building something beautiful." Keanu saw the message later that night as he sat on his balcony overlooking the quiet city. The world outside was loud, reporters still called daily. Talk shows begged for his return, but he ignored it all. He read Marcus's text and smiled, his thumb hovering over the screen before typing back. "Didn't do it for thanks, my friend. Did it because it matters." He hesitated, then added, "You're leading something real now. Keep going." Marcus read the message the next morning before stepping on stage for another workshop in Phoenix. He felt a warmth spread through his chest. For months, Keanu had stayed out of sight, letting the story evolve without interference. Yet somehow, his quiet presence was always there, steady, invisible, guiding. After the workshop ended, the local news team approached Marcus for a short interview. Standing in front of the camera, he smiled humbly as the reporter asked, "We've heard rumors that Keanu Reeves is supporting your project financially. Is that true?" Marcus paused. He could have dodged the question, could have kept the secret intact, but that wasn't the kind of honesty he wanted to build this movement on. He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "He's been helping quietly from the beginning. He didn't want credit, but he deserves it. This isn't just my mission. It's ours." The story aired that evening, and by morning, it was everywhere again. Headlines read, "Keanu Reeves secretly funds nationwide dignity program." The public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. People admired that he hadn't sought attention for his generosity. Others said it proved what they already believed, that true character shows when no one is looking. Keanu's phone buzzed non-stop, but he turned it face down, uninterested in the noise. The only message he replied to was Marcus's follow-up text later that night. "Sorry, the secret's out." Keanu sent back a simple line. Secrets don't matter when the truth helps people. From that point on, the Serve with Dignity initiative exploded. Within months, over 100 restaurants, cafes, and hospitality groups across the country had adopted Marcus's training model. Community colleges began offering free workshops using his framework. Labor unions invited him to speak at national conferences. His approach was always the same: heartfelt, unpolished, deeply human. He would start each session with the same story about that night in the restaurant, ending with the same reminder. That moment wasn't about embarrassment or revenge. It was about grace. Because grace is power, power that doesn't hurt anyone to use. Keanu occasionally joined him at select events, always sitting quietly in the back until the end. When Marcus spotted him, he'd wave him up to the stage, and together, they'd answer questions from audiences who saw them not as a celebrity and a worker, but as equals bound by purpose. At one event in Seattle, a young woman raised her hand and asked, "Mr. Reeves, what does it feel like to know you started all of this?" Keanu smiled gently and shook his head. "No, I didn't start it," he said. "Marcus did. All I did was stop pretending I didn't see what was wrong." The audience fell silent before bursting into applause. Marcus glanced at him, his eyes filled with gratitude that didn't need words. By the end of that year, the two men had become symbols of compassion-driven change. News outlets called them the quiet revolutionaries, but they didn't see themselves that way. They were just two men who refused to let cruelty go unanswered. And their refusal had built a bridge between millions. One evening, after another long day of speaking engagements, Marcus stood beside Keanu outside a small community hall in Los Angeles. The sunset painted the sky gold and rose. "You realize," Marcus said softly, "this all started because of one small act." Keanu smiled. "Yeah, but small acts build big worlds." They stood together in the fading light, watching families leave the hall, laughing, hugging, and talking about kindness. The world hadn't changed completely, but tonight, it felt closer. 12 months later, Maison Élysée had become almost unrecognizable. What was once an elite restaurant known for exclusivity was now a place people described as warm, welcoming, and quietly revolutionary. The chandeliers still sparkled, the tables still gleamed with white linen, but the soul of the place had changed. Laughter flowed easier. Customers thanked the staff by name. The waiters walked taller, proud of their work and the culture they had built together. At the heart of it all stood Marcus Hall. Now the floor manager, he carried himself with calm authority. His uniform was the same, but his presence was different, steady, confident, respected. He knew every server's story, every dishwasher's dream, and every regular customer's favorite meal. Under his guidance, Maison Élysée had become more than a restaurant. It was a lesson in humanity. The men who once mocked him that fateful night were long forgotten. Some had issued hollow apologies in the months that followed, but Marcus never cared to revisit the past. He didn't need their remorse. He had moved forward, and the world had followed with him. That evening, the restaurant hummed with its usual Friday night rhythm. The soft piano music mingled with the clink of silverware and quiet conversation. Marcus made his rounds, checking tables, greeting guests, and helping where needed. Every now and then, a customer would recognize him and whisper, "That's him, the man from the story." Marcus would smile politely, nod, and return to work. Just before 8, a hostess approached him with a puzzled expression. "Marcus," she whispered, "there's someone asking for a table in the corner. He didn't make a reservation, but he said you'd want him seated." Marcus followed her gaze. At the far end of the dining room, near the same spot where everything had once fallen apart, sat Keanu Reeves. He was dressed simply, in a black shirt and blazer, his hair tied loosely at the back. The years hadn't changed him much. Still humble, still unassuming, still carrying that quiet energy that drew people in. Marcus smiled, warmth spreading through his chest. "Give him table 12, he said softly. "I'll take care of it." He walked toward the corner, weaving between tables until he reached the man who had changed his life with one act of courage. Keanu looked up, smiling. "Marcus," he said, rising to shake his hand. I hear the food's a lot better these days, Marcus chuckled. We've made some upgrades since your last visit. I can tell, Keanu replied, glancing around. Feels different here. Lighter. That's the goal, Marcus said. You started something that night. We've just kept it going. Keanu nodded. Then, I'll take whatever the manager recommends. Marcus grinned. Coming right up. As he walked back toward the kitchen, he caught the pianist's eye and gave a subtle nod. The melody changed to something soft and hopeful, a tune that carried a feeling of renewal through the room. Marcus filled the order himself, a simple meal, cooked with care, plated perfectly. When he returned to the table, he set the dish down gently. Dinner is served, he said. Keanu smiled up at him. You're still serving with dignity, I see. Marcus shook his head. No, he said quietly. Now, I'm leading with it. The two men exchanged a small, knowing smile. No grand words, no cameras, no crowd. Just two souls who understood that kindness, once set in motion, never truly stops. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt almost sacred, the hum of conversation fading beneath the soft rise of the piano. It was the same space where humiliation had once echoed, but now it held laughter, gratitude, and grace. The tables that once watched cruelty unfold were now home to kindness. It felt like the restaurant itself had healed. Marcus stood beside the table, not as a servant, but as a man, fulfilled. It's strange, he said quietly. A year ago, I couldn't walk through this room without remembering every second of that night. Now, it's just peace. Keanu nodded, smiling gently. That's the best kind of ending. The one that doesn't erase the past, but turns it into purpose. Marcus thought about that for a moment. It's funny, he said, how one night can change everything. Not just for me, but for everyone who works here. We have new staff now, kids fresh out of school, people who used to be afraid to speak up. They call me Mr. All like I'm someone important. Keanu chuckled softly. You are, Marcus grinned. Maybe, but I tell them the same thing every time. They don't work for me, they work with me. Respect isn't a gift I give them. It's a standard we all live by. Across the room, Alyssa, now 10 years old, peeked from the kitchen door. She'd begged to visit that evening, saying she wanted to see where it all started. Marcus waved her over, and she hurried across the floor, her hair tied back in a bright yellow ribbon. Keanu turned and smiled warmly. Alyssa, look at you, you've grown since last time. She beamed shyly. Hi, Mr. Keanu. Daddy says you don't like being famous. Keanu laughed. He's right about that. Then I'll just say you're nice, she said with a grin. Marcus laughed, shaking his head. That's her way of saying thank you again. Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small paper bag. Then I think I owe her something in return. He handed it to her gently. Inside was a simple silver pendant shaped like a small tree. For growing strong, he said softly, just like your dad. Alyssa's face lit up. She hugged him tightly, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. After she ran back toward the kitchen, Marcus looked at Keanu, emotion rising in his chest. You didn't have to do that. Keanu smiled faintly. Maybe not, but I wanted to. The piano shifted to a softer tune, the kind that feels like forgiveness wrapped in melody. Around them, guests laughed, and servers moved gracefully, their interactions gentle, genuine. The atmosphere carried something rare, a collective understanding that respect wasn't a slogan anymore. It was a way of being. Keanu finished his meal, setting his napkin aside. You've done good here, Marcus, he said quietly. You turned pain into something living. Marcus met his gaze. You helped me remember that it was worth doing. They both stood, shaking hands again, just as they had a year before, but this time, it wasn't in defiance of cruelty. It was in celebration of what compassion had built. As Keanu prepared to leave, Marcus said, You know, we kept that tray. The one from that night. It's hanging in the staff lounge. A reminder that dignity doesn't break, even when it falls. Keanu smiled. That's perfect. He gave one last glance around the restaurant before heading toward the door. The pianist continued to play, his melody rising like a quiet prayer. Marcus watched him go, then turned back toward the dining room, his heart full. The light was softer now, golden against the polished floor. He straightened his jacket, glanced once more toward the kitchen where Alyssa was watching proudly, and smiled. The same restaurant that had once been a stage for cruelty had become a sanctuary for kindness. The same man who had once been humiliated now led with grace. And as the piano swelled and the laughter rose again, Marcus whispered to himself, "Full circle." That night, the city rested under a quiet haze, its lights reflecting across the Hudson like ripples of memory. In his apartment, Keanu sat by the window where he'd written so many of his thoughts over the past year. The room was dim, lit only by the small desk lamp beside his open journal, the same notebook he had written in the Cumbresse. Night after the incident now lay before him, its pages filled with reflections on kindness, humanity, and the quiet power of empathy. He took a deep breath, ran his fingers over the worn cover, and began to write again. "Sometimes standing up for someone means kneeling down beside them," he wrote slowly, pausing to watch the ink settle into the paper. The words came easily this time, born not from sorrow, but from understanding. He thought of Marcus, the strength in his silence, the humility in his leadership, the way he'd turned pain into purpose without bitterness. The memory of that night in the restaurant no longer brought discomfort. It brought peace. It reminded Keanu that kindness doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it kneels. He glanced at the small silver tray resting on a shelf near the piano, a gift Marcus had sent months earlier with a note that read, "To the man who reminded the world what dignity looks like." Keanu smiled faintly. "No," he murmured. "You reminded them, my friend." Outside, the streets were quiet. A delivery truck rolled by. A man walking his dog stopped to greet the night guard outside a nearby building. A simple exchange, a nod, a smile, a moment of shared humanity. That, Keanu thought, was what it was all about. Not fame, not headlines, just people remembering how to see one another. He turned another page and continued writing. "Every time we choose respect over ridicule, we build something the world can stand on. It's invisible, but it holds everything together. We don't need to be heroes, we just need to notice." He stopped for a moment, resting his pen on the journal. The sound of the piano in his memory still lingered, the gentle tune that had filled the restaurant when Marcus served him one last time. It was more than music now. It was the sound of grace coming full circle. Keanu closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward the window. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably locking up the restaurant, saying goodnight to his staff, maybe tucking Alyssa into bed. And that was enough. In a world that often celebrated noise, this story had begun and ended with silence, an act of quiet courage that changed everything. Keanu took a slow breath, letting the stillness fill him. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "Maybe that's what hope sounds like." The following morning, sunlight poured through Keanu's window, painting soft gold across the open pages of his journal. He reread the line he'd written hours earlier. "Sometimes standing up for someone means kneeling down beside them." It still resonated. It felt like the truest thing he'd ever written. He closed the notebook carefully and placed it on the piano, beside the tray Marcus had sent. The two objects, one of metal, one of paper, seemed to speak to each other, reminders of how humility and action were never separate things. Later that day, Keanu met with the small production team that helped him manage his foundation's media projects. They'd been preparing a short public tribute for the one-year anniversary of the Serve with Dignity movement, and they wanted him to narrate the final lines. Keanu agreed, but only under one condition, that the video didn't focus on him. He sat before the microphone, his voice calm and steady as the footage rolled across the screen in front of him. The video began not with celebrities or speeches, but with real people, restaurant servers laughing together during a lunch rush, janitors sharing coffee before sunrise, a hotel housekeeper teaching her daughter how to fold towels neatly. Each frame was a glimpse into the quiet beauty of ordinary work, moments that too often went unseen. Over the images, Keanu's voice spoke softly. "We live in a world that celebrates power, but real power isn't loud, it listens, it lifts, it serves." The video shifted to clips from Marcus's workshops, showing him standing before classrooms, his sleeves rolled up, his hands expressive as he spoke. Respect builds, his voice echoed through the montage. And every time you choose it, you make the world a little better. Then came images of restaurant staff across America holding signs that read, "Serve with dignity," in their own handwriting. One sign said, "Dignity feeds the soul." Another read, "Kindness is free, so give it often." Finally, the camera cut to Keanu's final reflection. He looked directly into the lens, his tone sincere and unpolished. "Sometimes, standing up for someone means kneeling down beside them," he said. "It's not weakness, it's strength, the kind that changes the world, one quiet moment at a time." The video ended with a simple black screen that faded into a collage of smiling faces, restaurant workers, janitors, bus drivers, and hotel staff from across the country who had submitted their own photos to be part of the project. Beneath them, white text appeared, "Dedicated to those who serve with dignity every single day." As the music swelled, Keanu added one final line, his voice gentle yet resolute. "If you believe every job deserves respect, share this incredible story and tell us, have you ever seen someone stand up for what's right?" When the final note faded, the studio fell silent. The editor glanced up, blinking back emotion. "That's perfect," she said softly. "It's exactly what people need to hear." Keanu gave a small nod. "Then let's put it out there." Within hours, the video went live on every major platform. The world listened. Millions watched and shared, tagging their friends, posting their own stories of kindness. Waiters shared memories of customers who had stood up for them. Teachers wrote about students defending one another. Parents told their kids about Marcus's courage, using it as a lesson in empathy. Marcus and Alyssa watched it together that night, from their apartment, the glow of the screen lighting their faces. When Keanu's final line played, "Sometimes standing up for someone means kneeling down beside them," Alyssa looked up at her father with teary eyes and whispered, "That's you, Daddy." Marcus smiled and pulled her close. "No," he said softly, "that's us." Outside their window, the city buzzed with life buses rumbling, sirens in the distance, voices drifting from the street. Yet amid the noise there was a shared heartbeat, a quiet reminder that kindness still mattered. And somewhere, in countless kitchens, cafes, and restaurants, ordinary people paused for just a moment longer before speaking harshly, before ignoring a worker, before choosing impatience over grace. They remembered this story, the one that began with a tray of broken glass and ended with a movement of dignity. For Keanu, it was never about heroism. For Marcus, it was never about redemption. It was always about one thing: seeing the humanity that connects us all.